Hello, and welcome to another edition of Mini Bites. We are on week 3, part 1 of our series covering 1 Corinthians chapters 5 through 7, called Christians and Sexual Sin. So go ahead and grab your Bibles and turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and we're going to read verses 1 through 9 today. Okay, chapter 7, verse 1. Now, for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry. So this section of 1 Corinthians was written in response to, obviously, a letter that Paul himself received from the church at Corinth, asking various questions. And this is one that he's answering. And so in doing so, he is still continuing to address sexual sin, temptation, things like that. But obviously they asked a specific question about marriage itself. Later in the chapter, Paul explains why he is saying not marrying or being celibate is the preferred way. And so I want to just read chapter 7, verses 32 through 35 real quick. He says, I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. So this is what he means by it's better for you not to stay married. And so we're going to see this several times in the text today and also in chapter 7 as a whole. He's not prohibiting marriage, obviously. He's just saying, keep your devotion to the Lord, and it's best done in a celibate or unmarried way, just as the Apostle Paul is. But obviously, he thinks very highly of marriage. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 5, he talks about marriage in great depth, and he likens it to the mystical union of Christ in the church. So if there was any issues whatsoever with marriage, obviously marriage would not be used as a metaphor for Christ in the church. In fact, the church is called the bride, and Jesus is the groom or the bridegroom. Also, of course, if there were no marriage, if there was no marital relations and relationship, then the world would stop being populated, or certainly the church would. So by no means is he saying that. He's using it almost in an exaggerated way, saying, I wish everyone was like this. So we continue. Reading verse 1 again. Now, for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. So this is the monogamous role, the monogamous marriage. This is a commandment of God. One man should have one wife should have one husband. But notice that the emphasis here is on the avoidance of sin. And so his particular case of talking about marriage here is the avoidance of sin and something that is going on in the church at Corinth. The primary heresy that he's dealing with or trying to combat is that of Gnosticism. Gnosticism says that the spirit is good, but anything of the body or the flesh or material things are evil. And so with this heresy of Gnosticism, it takes two forms. The first form would be, since the body is evil, the body should just keep doing whatever it wants to do. This obviously leads to great sin, but what Gnosticism, this heresy that was rampant in Corinth, said was basically the body is not connected to the spirit. Worry about spiritual things for your salvation, but the body can do whatever it wants to do because it's going to be destroyed anyway. This is perhaps one of the reasons why in chapter 5 he is addressing the man who had sex with his father's wife and they're not doing anything about it. Perhaps why they're not doing anything about it is because they have given into this heresy that the body's evil anyway, it doesn't matter what it does. So that's one form of heresy. The second form of heresy is what he's now dealing with specifically here in chapter 7 of his letter. And that is, since the body is evil, the body must be thoroughly and completely subdued. And any appetites that it has, particularly sexually, you should stop. Now, obviously, you should stop that if it's outside of marriage. And in that regard, it would agree with Christianity. But the heresy would say that the body is evil, so you've got to shut it down. You've got to subdue any and every appetite that it has. And so in doing so, then you would shut down the marital union, the intercourse within the sanctity of marriage that is good and wholesome and something that God gave to us to enjoy and to procreate with. And so those who gave in to this heresy stopped having sexual intercourse with their spouse. So this is what he's addressing here. Verse 3. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Obviously, this is referring to the union of husband and wife becoming one body. And so it's your own body for sure, but it's also your spouse's body. And the shutting down of sexual relations, what it does is it creates or limits completely, in some regards, destroys intimacy within the marriage. My dad used to have a saying that sex in the marriage is only 10% of the marriage. A healthy marriage, it's only 10%. It's something that's vitally important, but when it's healthy within a marriage, it's 10%. But without sex in a marriage, it becomes 90%. Obviously, it's just a percentage that's made up, but the idea is a good one in that sex in a healthy manner within a marriage is one of the great parts of intimacy, but there's others as well. But without it, it becomes larger than it should be. It becomes a focal point for one or both spouses. And so sex within a marriage is very important for intimacy. And he says that it's an obligation. It's something that is a part of marriage. It's not something that should just stop. It's something that is a part of marriage, and therefore it's needful and it's important. And also notice that they should mutually fulfill this. It's not the wife must for the husband or the husband must for the wife. It's mutual. It's both of them. And this really combats what was going on in the Jewish community of the day, and that was relegating the wife or the woman to nothing, to basically property. Here, he's saying it's mutual. It's the husband also has responsibility to the wife or to the woman. He continues, verse 5, do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. If not, then temptation comes in. Not that temptation isn't at the door anyway, but the temptation becomes exponential within a marriage if the marriage bed is defiled, either by sexual immorality or the lack of relationship with one another. It is defiled and temptation comes in. And he says, do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time. It's something that you both need to agree upon, and it has a specific purpose, and that is for prayer or getting closer to God. It becomes a form of fasting, but it can't be the husband wants to do it and the wife isn't in agreement, or vice versa. So it's mutual consent in order for this to happen. And then he says, only for a time, otherwise temptation is right at the door. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now he's writing to the church, he's writing to Christians, and he's saying that it can only be limited or reduced completely for a short time that is consensual. Then you must come back because Satan is ready to tempt. God created man and woman with natural urges for sex, and it's a beautiful thing within the confines of the marriage. But Satan is constantly wanting to tempt us to go outside of the marriage, to have fornication, to have adultery. And so if we are not doing what we're supposed to do in the marriage, then those temptations are just magnified to a great degree. Then he says, verse 6, I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. So the concession, rather than a command that he's saying, is being married or not being married. That he wishes all could be like him. We talked about this at the beginning of the mini bites. And the reason is so that you're solely and wholly devoted to God, and that there's no distraction of needing to do things for your spouse or for your family. But obviously, he knows not everyone can do this. We already mentioned, otherwise the world would stop being populated, or certainly the church would. But also, he realizes that he has a special gift from God to be celibate, that not everyone is or can, and that it's not a greater gift or a lesser gift. It's just a gift that he has. And the reason that Paul has it is because he is responsible for a great expansion of the gospel. And that's what celibacy is for, is to expand the gospel so that you can strictly just focus your energies and your time on that. And that's what Paul had. Verse 8, he says, now to the unmarried and the widows, I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I am. Same reasons. But, verse 9, but if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, or in these cases of a widow or widower, should remarry, should also get another spouse. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. The Greek word for burn is in the present tense, meaning that it's a continuous urge. If you have a continuous urge and it's causing you to burn with passion within your flesh, within your being, then it is better to marry. And it's important that we understand that both being celibate and being married is blessed by God and called by God. We each have our calling. We each have our own gifts. So what we need to do is, if you're unmarried, Paul says it's better to stay that way, just devote your energies and your time to God. But if you don't have that gifting, then seek God for the correct spouse for you. If you're married, this is the section that he's really talking about. If you're married, then make sure you are intimate with your spouse, except for just a season of prayer, but it's got to be mutually agreed upon. Because if sex is cut out of the marriage because of some heresy like Gnosticism or something else, thinking that they're somehow more holy if they don't have sex. It is against Scripture and must be changed in the marriage bed.